They say a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas. What then can a single contemptuous laugh in a New York airport set in motion? For Horizon Airways, that laugh wasn't a gentle flutter. It was a sonic boom that heralded a corporate hurricane. You're about to hear the story of Dr. Seraphina Hayes, a woman whose name a gate agent couldn't be bothered to pronounce with respect. He chose to mock her passport. She chose to dismantle his employer's global operations before her flight even landed. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about the catastrophic cost of underestimation and the hard, unyielding hammer of karma. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was its usual cocktail of frantic energy and stale recycled oxygen. It was a river of humanity, flowing in currents of anxiety, excitement, and sheer exhaustion. For Dr. Seraphina Hayes, it was merely a sterile gateway, a necessary inconvenience, separating her from a much-needed respite in Geneva. At 42, Seraphina had built an empire from ones and zeros, a global logistics and technology firm named Ethelred Logistics and Tech Ale2 that was the invisible skeleton holding up a significant portion of the world's supply chain. Her company's proprietary software Nexus was the gold standard for everything from maritime freight tracking to aviation cargo management. Airlines, shipping conglomerates, and national customs agencies paid ALT hundreds of millions a year, not just for the software, but for the intricate, seamless integration and 24/7 support that came with it. Nexus wasn't a tool they used, it was the central nervous system of their operations. And Seraphina was its creator, its architect, its unblinking eye. Today, however, she was not Dr. Hayes' CEO. She was just Sarah, a woman in a tailored camel hair coat over a simple but elegant black silk blouse and trousers, looking forward to 10 days of Swiss Air alpine lakes and blissful anonymity. Her success afforded her the luxury of flying first class, but she carried herself with a quiet grace that drew no attention. Her only adornment was a vintage Omega watch, a gift to herself after ALT's first billion-dollar valuation. She approached the boarding gate for Horizon Airways Flight 112 to Geneva. The line for premium passengers was short. At the podium stood 2 agents, one a woman in her late 40s with a strained smile and a name tag that read Brenda, was busy tapping at her computer. The other was a younger man, perhaps in his late 20s, with a smug set to his mouth and a name tag identifying him as Kyle. He was the one who beckoned her forward. "Passport and boarding pass," he said, his voice flat, not bothering to make eye contact. Seraphina handed them over. Her passport was a deep blue. Its golden eagle emblem slightly worn from the countless stamps that filled its pages. Testament to a life lived across continents. Kyle took at his thumb, flicking it open. He glanced at her boarding pass, then at the passport's photo page. He looked up at her, then back down at the passport. A small, derisive smirk crawled onto his lips. "Seraphina Hayes," he read aloud, but he pronounced it with deliberate exaggeration. "Seraphina." He let out a short, sharp snort of a laugh. It wasn't a jovial sound. It was a sound of ridicule. That a real name? The question hung in the air, thick and foul. It was designed to diminish, to other her. Seraphina felt a familiar hot flash of anger rise from her chest, a feeling she'd had to suppress since she was a little girl in a predominantly white school being told her hair was unprofessional or that she was so articulate. But now the anger was different. It was colder, sharper. She kept her face a placid mask. "It is the name printed on my government-issued passport, which makes it as real as yours, I imagine," she replied, her voice even and dangerously calm. Kyle's smirk widened. He wasn't used to being challenged. He looked at her picture again, then back at her face, his eyes performing a slow, insulting scan. "Photo doesn't really look like you. Lots of different hair now." He gestured vaguely at her elegant shoulder-length locks. The photo taken 5 years prior showed her with a shorter, natural afro. "People change their hair, Kyle," she said, her use of his name a subtle reclaiming of the power dynamic. "It's a common human practice." The other passengers in line were shifting uncomfortably. They could hear every word. Brenda, the supervisor, finally looked up, her expression one of annoyance, not at her colleague, but at the delay. "Is there a problem here, Kyle?" Brenda asked, her tone suggesting the problem was Seraphina, just verifying the passenger. Kyle said, his eyes still locked on Seraphina, enjoying the moment. "Gotta be careful. TSA regulations." He tapped the passport photo with a grimy finger. "Just seems off." This was the final straw. It had moved beyond a petty insult into a baseless accusation, wrapped in the guise of security protocol. He was insinuating that she, Dr. Seraphina Hayes, a woman who had passed through more high-level security checks than he had eaten hot meals, might be using a fraudulent document. "There is nothing off about my passport," Seraphina stated, her voice dropping an octave. The calm was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard edge. "It has been scanned and approved by TSA by your airline's check-in system, and at every other airport I have visited this year. I suggest you scan it and let me board my flight." Kyle seemed to relish her anger. It was what he wanted. He wanted to provoke a reaction to see the angry black woman he likely had a caricature of in his mind. He held the passport up to Brenda. "What do you think, Bren?" You see the resemblance. Brenda gave it a cursory, dismissive glance. "She just looks a little different." "It's fine," she muttered, clearly wanting the situation to go away. But she did nothing to chastise Kyle. Her silence was a ringing endorsement of his behavior. With a final theatrical sigh, Kyle slapped the passport down on the scanner. It beeped. Green light. Approved. He slid it back across the counter toward Seraphina, without a word, his face a mask of insolent victory. He had successfully humiliated her in public and faced no consequences. Seraphina picked up her passport, her fingers steady, despite the fury that was now a frozen singularity in her gut. She looked at Kyle, then at Brenda. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply held their gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, her dark eyes promising a reckoning they could not possibly comprehend. She turned and walked down the jet bridge, her heels clicking with a metronomic, purposeful rhythm. The flight attendant at the aircraft door greeted her with a cheerful, "Welcome aboard!" Seraphina gave a tight, polite smile. She was shown to her seat 1A, a spacious pod at the front of the first-class cabin. She slid her carry-on into the overhead compartment, sat down on the plush leather seat, and fastened her seatbelt. For a few minutes, she just breathed, in and out. The public humiliation stung, the casual racism was exhausting. But beneath it all, something else was crystallizing. It was the audacity. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of a man like Kyle, enabled by a system and a supervisor like Brenda, to wield his minuscule amount of power like a weapon against her dignity. Horizon Airways had allowed this. They had trained, employed, and implicitly condoned this behavior. They thought she was just another passenger to be trifled with. They thought their world was secure. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Seraphina reached into her briefcase and pulled out her sleek black laptop. As the plane pushed back from the gate, she connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, the $49.99 fee, an amusingly trivial cost for what she was about to do. The subject line of her first email was simple and direct. To Marcus Thorne, COO, Ethelred Logistics and Tech. Subject, urgent. Initiate protocol Scythe. Horizon Airways. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't just a passenger on Flight 112 anymore. She was Dr. Seraphina Hayes, and she was about to remind Horizon Airways and the world that while some people flap their wings and cause a tornado, others can snap their fingers and cause an extinction-level event. The gate agent had laughed at her passport. She was about to make sure his employer wouldn't have any international routes left to check passports for. The cabin of Horizon Airways Flight 112 was an oasis of curated calm. The lights were dimmed to a soothing blue, champagne was being poured into crystal flutes, and the low hum of the twin Rolls-Royce engines was a lullaby, promising a smooth journey across the Atlantic. For the other passengers in first class, it was a time to recline their seats, browse the movie selection, or drift off to sleep. For Seraphina Hayes, it was a war room. Her laptop screen was a constellation of secure communication windows and encrypted data streams. Marcus Thorne, her chief operating officer, and a man whose loyalty was exceeded only by his ruthless efficiency, had responded to her initial email in less than 60 seconds. From Marcus Thorne to Seraphina Hayes. Subject re-urgent. Initiate protocol Scythe. Horizon Airways message. Sarah protocol Scythe initiated. Standing by. Legal is mobilized. Need confirmation code and justification for the record. What happened? Are you all right? Marcus was ex-military intelligence, a man who thought in terms of strategy and contingency plans. Protocol Scythe was one of dozens of emergency measures they had designed for scenarios, ranging from hostile takeovers to catastrophic data breaches. It had never been intended for something like this, but its framework was perfect. It was a digital guillotine, allowing ALT to surgically and immediately suspend all services and sever all data links with a client found to be an incurable breach of contract. Seraphina typed her reply, her words precise and devoid of emotion. From Seraphina Hayes to Marcus Thorne. Message Marcus, confirmation, Scythe Alpha 09. Justification is a direct and public breach of Section 12, subsection B of our Master Service Agreement. Conduct detrimental to brand integrity and professional decorum. I was subjected to a targeted, racially motivated series of insults and baseless accusations by a Horizon Gate agent identified as Kyle at JFK Gate B28, Flight 112. His actions were publicly witnessed and implicitly condoned by his supervisor, Brenda. I have a full audio recording of the incident. She had discreetly started a voice memo on her phone the moment Kyle had first smirked. It was an old habit, a defense mechanism, honed over years of navigating boardrooms where her ideas were often dismissed until a male colleague repeated them. Their conduct represents a systemic failure that exposes ALT to reputational risk by association. This is not a negotiable service complaint. It is a fundamental violation of our partnership ethos. I am fine. Proceed as planned. Marcus's reply was instantaneous. From Marcus Thorne to Seraphina Hayes. Message understood. The justification is logged and ironclad. The recording makes it unimpeachable. The legal team led by Eleanor Vance is drafting the official notification now. We are targeting a full suspension of services at 0440 GMT. This will hit their primary European departure bank, and cause maximum immediate disruption to their global network. Is that timing approved? 0440 GMT. That would be midnight in New York, just as the last of their transatlantic flights were in the air. It was early morning in Europe. Horizon's hubs in London, Paris, and Frankfurt would be preparing for the morning rush. Their systems would simply die. No cargo manifests, no weight and balance calculations, no customs pre-clearance data being fed to destination airports. Ground crews wouldn't receive loading instructions. The Nexus system, the digital backbone of their entire operation, would become a black hole. It was devastating. It was perfect. From Seraphina Hayes to Marcus Thorne. Message timing approved. Execute with precision. I want a complete information blackout from our end until they initiate contact with my office directly. No one on the operations team is to speak to them. All inquiries are to be routed to Eleanor. Send me the final draft of the notification before it goes out. A flight attendant approached her pod, a warm smile on her face. Ms. Hayes. Another glass of champagne, or perhaps our dinner service will be starting shortly. Tonight we have a pan-seared halibut or a filet mignon. Just water for now, thank you. Seraphina said, her own smile not quite reaching her eyes. The attendant nodded and glided away. The duality of the moment was stark. Here she was, a pampered guest being offered fine dining. On her screen, she was commanding an operation that would cost this very airline hundreds of millions of dollars before the sun rose in America. A new email popped up. It was from Eleanor Vance, her general counsel, a woman renowned in corporate law circles for her sharp mind and take-no-prisoners approach in negotiations. From Eleanor Vance to Seraphina Hayes. CC Marcus Thorne. Subject, draft. Notice of immediate service suspension. Horizon Airways. The attached legal document was a masterpiece of cold corporate lethality. It cited the contract clause, briefly described the incident without inflammatory language, referring to it only as an event involving unacceptable professional conduct by Horizon Airways personnel, which has caused significant and irreparable damage to the perceived integrity of the ALT Horizon partnership, and laid out the consequences. Pursuant to Section 12, subsection C. Ethelred Logistics and Tech, hereby gives notice of the immediate and indefinite suspension of all services software licenses and data support provided under the Master Service Agreement, dated October 1st, 2022. This suspension will remain in effect pending a comprehensive review by ALT leadership. All active data links will be severed at 04:00 Greenwich Mean Time. It was airtight. By framing it as a response to a breach that damaged her company's integrity, Seraphina was on solid legal ground. Horizon's lawyers could scream and threaten, but the language in the contract which Eleanor herself had drafted 2 years ago was their cage. Seraphina sent her approval. The machine was now in motion, a complex series of actions delegated to her most trusted lieutenants across the globe. In London, ALT's European operations chief would oversee the physical and digital severing of the data centers. In Singapore, the Asian markets team would ensure the shutdown cascaded through their partner networks. In Dallas, just miles from Horizon's own corporate headquarters, Marcus would preside over the entire operation from their North American command center. The time ticked by. 30 GMT. 03:45 GMT. Seraphina closed her communication windows and pulled up a live map of global air traffic. It was a beautiful, pulsating web of light, with thousands of tiny airplane icons crawling across the dark expanse of the planet. She zoomed in on the ones marked with the Horizon Airways livery, a stylized orange sun. There were hundreds of them in the air, each one a metal tube filled with people, cargo, and crew, all utterly oblivious to the fact that the digital ground beneath them was about to vanish. At 03:59 GMT, a final encrypted message came through from Marcus. It contained only one word: executing. Seraphina watched the clock on her laptop tick over. 04:00:00 GMT. For a moment, nothing seemed to change on the flight map, but she knew that in server farms and operations centers around the world, a series of automated scripts were running. Firewalls were being reconfigured, access keys were being revoked, data streams were being terminated. The first sign of trouble appeared about 90 seconds later. A Horizon cargo flight from Hong Kong to Anchorage, due to send its pre-clearance data to US Customs, would have failed its handshake. An automated alert would have flashed up in some lonely operations room. An anomaly. Then a flight preparing for pushback in Frankfurt, bound for Chicago, would find its weight and balance software suddenly unresponsive. The pilots would be unable to get their final load sheet. A delay. At Horizon's hub at London Heathrow, the ground crews for 6 different long-haul flights would be staring at blank tablets. No loading instructions for the millions of dollars of cargo sitting on the tarmac. More delays. It was a cascade, a digital heart attack. Within minutes, the anomalies would become a crisis. Within an hour, it would be chaos. Seraphina closed her laptop. The click echoed in the quiet cabin, a sound of finality. She took a slow sip of her water. The flight attendant returned, sensing a change in her demeanor. "Are you ready for that meal now, Ms. Hayes?" Seraphina looked up, and for the first time since boarding the plane, a genuine if tired smile touched her lips. "Yes," she said. "I believe I am. The filet mignon sounds wonderful." She had sowed the wind. Now 6 miles above the Atlantic, insulated in her first-class cocoon, she would eat her dinner and wait for Horizon Airways to begin reaping the whirlwind. Richard Sterling, the CEO of Horizon Airways, was woken by the 3rd call, the first 2 vibrating on his nightstand at 11:08 p.m. Dallas time had been ignored. He valued his sleep. But the 3rd call wasn't to his cell. It was to the private hard-wired line in his study, a number known to only 5 people. Its ring was a shrill, insistent harbinger of disaster. He threw on a silk robe and stumbled into his oak-paneled study, snatching the receiver. "This had better be a four," he growled. "It's worse, Richard." It was David Chen, his chief operations officer, and his voice was stretched thin with panic. "It's a total blackout. Nexus is down, all of it." Richard sank into his leather chair, suddenly wide awake. "What do you mean, down? Like a server glitch?" "No, not a glitch. It's not that it's broken. It's that it's gone. Our credentials are all invalid. Our data links are terminated. From our end, it's like Ethelred Logistics and Tech just ceased to exist. We've been completely cut off. Every single international operation we have is blind." The scale of the catastrophe washed over Richard in a cold wave. Nexus wasn't just a piece of software. It managed their cargo manifests, calculated the critical weight and balance for every flight, processed international customs data, coordinated with ground crews across 80 airports in 45 countries. Without it, they couldn't safely load a single international flight. They couldn't get clearance to land cargo in foreign countries. They were for all intents and purposes grounded. "Get their tech support on the line," Richard commanded, his voice rising. "Get Marcus Thorne. Get their goddamn CEO, whatever her name is." "We've tried." David's voice cracked. "Their support lines are automated, routing us to a single email address. We've sent 24 messages. Nothing. I tried Marcus on his cell. It goes straight to a voicemail that says he's unavailable. It's a complete stonewall, Richard. They've locked us out." In the background of the call, Richard could hear shouting a symphony of chaos from the operations centre. Heathrow Airport, London. 04:25 GMT. Amelia Vance, a shift supervisor for Horizon's ground operations, stared at her tablet in disbelief. The screen that should have been displaying the loading schematics for Flight 22 to Singapore was a blank white page with a single damning error message: "Access denied. Vendor credentials revoked." 5 other supervisors were reporting the same thing. On the tarmac, millions of pounds worth of cargo pharmaceuticals, electronics, luxury goods sat idle. The baggage handlers were standing around, looking to her for answers she didn't have. The departure time of 06:00 was a fantasy. They couldn't even begin to load the plane. Panic began to set in. JFK Airport, New York. 23:45 Eastont. Kyle Thompson was finishing his shift. The incident with the black woman Seraphina had left him feeling smug. He'd put her in her place. He and Brenda had shared a laugh about it in the break room, calling her uppity. He was clocking out thinking about grabbing a beer when his personal phone buzzed. It was a group chat with other Horizon Gate agents. Agent 1. "Anyone else hearing these rumors? LHR is a mess. Agent 2. Not just LHR. Frankfurt is reporting the same. Some massive IT failure. Agent 3, they just cancelled HA44 to Paris. Told us to go home. Total system crash." Kyle frowned. An IT failure. That sounded serious. He shrugged. Not his problem. He was off the clock. He headed out into the cool New York night, oblivious. Horizon Airways Global Operations Center, Dallas. 0030 CST. The room was a scene of controlled chaos turning into outright panic. Every screen on the main wall, which usually showed a sea of green on-time statuses, was now a cascade of red and amber. Delayed. System hold. Cancelled. Richard Sterling, now dressed in a suit but no tie, stormed into the room. The noise was deafening. "What do we know?" he bellowed at David Chen. "We got an email," David said, holding out his phone with a trembling hand. "It's a formal notice of service suspension from ALT's General Counsel." Richard snatched the phone and read the brief, brutally sterile message. It mentioned a breach of contract. "Conduct detrimental to brand integrity." What the hell did that mean? Did one of their pilots crash a plane in a simulator? Did a marketing campaign offend someone? It was maddeningly vague. "Get our legal team on this. Sue them. This is a violation of—" "It's not," a quiet voice interjected. It was Maria Flores, one of Horizon's top in-house lawyers, who had just arrived. Her face was pale. "I've pulled our master service agreement with ALT. Their counsel, Eleanor Vance, is notorious. She builds these behavioral integrity clauses into all their major contracts. They're designed to give them an out if they feel a partner's conduct is toxic or creates reputational liability. The clause is airtight, Richard. If they can prove a breach, they are within their rights to suspend service. The question is, what was the breach?" The first public reports began to hit the wire services. Reuters, 06:15 GMT. Horizon. Airways faces global meltdown. Sources Scythe, catastrophic IT failure. Bloomberg, 06:20 GMT Horizon. Sene stock plunges in pre-market trading amid widespread flight cancellations. Airline remains silent on cause. The world was waking up to the chaos. Thousands of Horizon passengers were arriving at airports to find their flights cancelled. News channels began broadcasting images of long, angry lines at Horizon ticket counters from Tokyo to Toronto. The financial cost was mounting with every passing minute. Each grounded long-haul flight represented millions in lost revenue, airport fees, and passenger compensation. Richard Sterling felt like the captain of a ship that was sinking in plain sight. They were hemorrhaging cash and goodwill at an astonishing rate. "Find the trigger," he roared to his senior staff, his voice hoarse. "I want to know what happened. I want every single incident report, every customer complaint, every social media mention from the last 48 hours. Something somewhere set them off. Find it. Now." A frantic search began. Teams of analysts began scouring data logs, security footage, and internal reports. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, a corporate scandal, a major security breach. They were looking for something big. They had no idea they were looking for a small, contemptuous laugh. Meanwhile, somewhere over the coast of Ireland, Dr. Seraphina Hayes was finishing her cheese course. She had politely declined the post-dinner cognac. She glanced at the flight map on her screen. A small smile played on her lips as she saw what was happening. The little orange icons representing Horizon flights were disappearing from the map as they were cancelled. Others were being diverted. The neat, orderly web was fraying into chaos. Her personal satellite phone, a discreet device she used for sensitive communications, buzzed softly. It was a text from Marcus. Phase 1 complete. Total network paralysis achieved. Estimated financial impact to Horizon is already north of $80 million. They are dark. They are panicking, waiting for them to figure out who to call. Seraphina typed a simple reply. Good. Let them panic. They won't connect with me until I'm on the ground in Geneva. Have Eleanor prepare the terms of surrender. She switched the phone off, reclined her seat to its fully flat position, and pulled the soft duvet over her. The low hum of the engines was now a truly comforting sound. It was the sound of her power, of her control. She had been publicly disrespected. The price for that disrespect was the complete and utter humiliation of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. As she closed her eyes, her last thought was of Kyle the gate agent. She wondered what he was doing right now. She hoped he was enjoying his beer. It would likely be the last one he'd enjoy, in blissful ignorance. The bill for his actions was coming due, and it was a debt that would bankrupt his entire world. Dr. Seraphina Hayes landed at a serene Geneva airport. The crisp, clean Swiss air was a welcome antidote to the recycled atmosphere of the airplane and the lingering toxicity of the encounter at JFK. As she was whisked away in a private car toward her hotel overlooking the lake, her phone remained silent. She had given Marcus strict instructions. She would not be available until 9:00 a.m. Central European Time. Let Richard Sterling and Horizon Airways stew in the chaos they had paid for back in Dallas. The Horizon Airways headquarters had become a pressure cooker. After 6 agonizing hours of searching, a junior analyst in the JFK Operations Division finally found it. It wasn't a major security breach or a corporate scandal. It was an internal incident report filed by a gate agent, standard procedure after any passenger confrontation. The report filed by Brenda was a masterclass in self-serving minimization. It read, "Passenger became agitated over standard ID verification, raised her voice, and caused a minor disturbance before boarding. Name, Seraphina Hayes. No further action required." When the name Seraphina Hayes was cross-referenced with ALT's leadership alarm bells, didn't just ring. They exploded. Richard Sterling stared at the screen, his face ashen. He looked at the gate agent's name on the report, Kyle Thompson, and felt a surge of rage so pure it made him dizzy. "Get me everything on this man," he choked out. "And the supervisor. Brenda, whatever her name is, pull their files. Get security footage from the gate. Get it now." Within 15 minutes, they were huddled around a monitor, watching the grainy CCTV footage from Gate B28. There was no audio, but the visuals were damning. They saw Kyle take the passport. They saw his smirk, the exaggerated way he spoke. They saw him laugh, a clear, visible act of mockery. They saw him hold the passport up to Brenda. They saw her dismissive wave. And they saw Dr. Hayes, her posture ramrod straight. Her face a mask of cold fury as she took back her passport. "Oh God, Maria Flores," the lawyer whispered. "That's it. That's the conduct detrimental to brand integrity." They handed it to them on a silver platter. Richard Sterling felt the floor drop out from under him. His global empire was being dismantled. His stock was in freefall, and the entire catastrophe had been triggered by the $5 an hour arrogance of a petty tyrant in a cheap uniform. "Fire them," he snarled. "I want them gone. Security escort them off the premises if they're on shift. Terminate their employment immediately for gross misconduct." Richard Maria said gently, "Firing them is the first step. It's not the solution. This isn't about 2 employees anymore. This is about Dr. Seraphina Hayes. Look at her on that screen. That is not a woman who will be satisfied with 2 terminations. She's holding a gun to our head, and she hasn't even made her demands yet." Right on cue at precisely 9:01 a.m. Geneva time, an email landed in Richard Sterling's personal inbox. It was from Eleanor Vance. Subject Communication Protocol. Message, "Mr. Sterling, Dr. Hayes is now available to speak with you. She will be joined by myself and her COO, Marcus Thorne. You will be alone. Any attempt to include other counsel or executives will result in the immediate termination of the call. You have one opportunity to make your case. Be prepared." The link to a secure video conference was included. It was scheduled for 10 minutes from now. Richard, sweating in his cold office, clicked the link at the appointed time. 3 faces appeared on his screen. Marcus Thorne, stern and imposing. Eleanor Vance, her expression sharp and analytical. And in the center, Dr. Seraphina Hayes. She was in a hotel suite, a spectacular view of Lake Geneva behind her. She looked rested, calm, and completely in command. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice smooth as polished marble. "I trust you are having a difficult day." Richard swallowed his pride. The time for blustering was over. "Dr. Hayes," he began, his voice strained. "On behalf of the entirety of Horizon Airways, I want to offer my most profound and sincere apology for the utterly unacceptable treatment you received from our staff. The employees involved have been terminated. Their behavior was a disgrace to our company, and—" "Stop!" Seraphina cut him off, not unkindly, but with absolute authority. "Do not mistake the symptom for the disease. Mr. Sterling. Firing those two individuals is like putting a bandage on a cancer. Kyle and Brenda are not the problem. They are the product of a corporate culture that either actively encourages or passively tolerates such behavior. They felt safe mocking me because your system made them feel safe. That is what we are here to discuss. She leaned forward slightly. My company ALT is built on a foundation of precision, respect, and integrity. We cannot, in good conscience, have our brand tethered to an organization that allows its public-facing employees to engage in racist and derogatory conduct. So the suspension of our services will remain in place until you have agreed to our terms. Terms? Richard asked, his heart sinking. He was expecting a massive financial penalty, a settlement in the tens of millions. Oh, they are quite comprehensive, Eleanor. Vance interjected, her voice crisp. A document is being sent to your email as we speak. But allow me to summarize. She laid out the demands. They were not about money paid to ALT. They were about systemic change. 1. A public unconditional apology. Richard Sterling himself was to issue a video apology to be posted on all of Horizon's social media channels and sent to major news outlets. The apology would name Dr. Hayes with her permission and describe in detail the nature of the incident. It would not use vague corporate speak. 2. A complete overhaul of DEI training. Horizon's entire diversity, equity, and inclusion program was to be scrapped. It would be replaced by a new curriculum designed and implemented by a consulting firm of Dr. Hayes' choosing at Horizon's expense. This training would be mandatory for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the board of directors. 3. The Horizon Foundation for Dignified Travel Horizon was to establish and fund a non-profit foundation with an initial non-revocable endowment of $50 million. The foundation's mission would be to combat discrimination in travel, provide legal aid to victims, and fund research on implicit bias in the service industry. The foundation's board would be appointed and overseen by a committee selected by Dr. Hayes. 4. Lifetime ban and public record. Kyle Thompson and Brenda Wallace would be terminated for cause, with the specifics of their gross misconduct, racially motivated harassment of a passenger entered into their official employment records, ensuring they would never work in the airline industry again. Richard stared, speechless. This wasn't a penalty. It was a complete corporate restructuring of his company's soul dictated by an outsider. The $50 million endowment was staggering, but the reputational cost of the public confession and the ceding of control over their training was incalculable. This is extensive, he finally managed to say. It is non-negotiable, Seraphina said calmly. You have until 5:00 p.m. Central European Time today to agree in principle. That gives you 8 hours. For every hour you delay past that deadline, the endowment for the foundation increases by $5 million. If we do not have an agreement by the time my vacation is over in 10 days, Marcus Thorne is authorized to activate Protocol Damocles. Richard didn't have to ask. He knew what that meant. Suspension was temporary. Damocles would be termination. The permanent cancellation of their contract, which would force Horizon into bankruptcy within a month. You have a choice, Mr. Sterling. Seraphina concluded, her eyes holding his through the screen. You can be the CEO who saved Horizon Airways by embracing true accountability, or you can be the CEO who presided over its collapse because you couldn't stomach the price of dignity. Your clock is ticking. The screen went blank. Richard Sterling sat alone in his office, the list of demands glowing on his monitor. He was trapped. She had checkmated him from 35,000 feet. The aftermath for Kyle Thompson was swift and brutal. He was fired via a curt phone call from HR. When he went to his apartment, a certified letter was waiting, detailing the cause of his termination. He was enraged, convinced he was a scapegoat. He tried to call Brenda, but her number was disconnected. The real hell began 2 days later, after Horizon issued its groveling, highly detailed public apology. Though they didn't name him officially, an internal memo detailing the incident and the firings was inevitably leaked to the press by a disgruntled Horizon employee. Suddenly, Kyle Thompson, JFK, gate agent, was a headline. His photo, scraped from an old social media profile, was everywhere. He became the face of racist service. He was evicted from his apartment when his landlord, facing pressure from other tenants, terminated his lease. He tried to get another job, but the moment a background check was run, or the moment a hiring manager Googled his name, the interview was over. He was a pariah. The smirk he had worn so proudly at the gate was now the brand of his own destruction. Within 6 months, he was broke, friendless, and back living in his parents' basement in Ohio, a bitter, angry man forever haunted by the laugh that had cost him everything. Brenda Wallace vanished, rumored to have changed her name and moved to a small town in the Midwest, forever looking over her shoulder. Horizon Airways survived, but it was a shadow of its former self. Richard Sterling delivered the humiliating apology, and the company began the long, painful process of implementing Seraphina's terms. Their stock eventually stabilized, but at a much lower value. They became a case study at business schools worldwide on the astronomical cost of a toxic culture. Dr. Seraphina Hayes finished her vacation. She skied, she read. She enjoyed the silence. She oversaw the establishment of the foundation from afar, ensuring it was staffed with passionate, brilliant people. She never spoke of the incident again publicly. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken with the force of a thunderclap. She had proven that dignity wasn't something to be requested. It was a condition to be demanded, and its denial could come at a price so high it could ground an entire airline. The world had been put on notice: never ever underestimate the person standing in front of you. 6 months after the grounding of Horizon Airways, the world had seemingly moved on. The news cycle, with its insatiable appetite for fresh outrage, had churned through a dozen other scandals. Horizon's stock had stabilized into a new, humbler reality. Flights were taking off and landing. But for Richard Sterling, the world had not moved on at all. It had been irrevocably altered. He was sitting in the back of a sterile conference room in Horizon's Dallas headquarters, not as a CEO, but as a mandatory participant. At the front of the room, a charismatic black woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead consultant from the firm Seraphina Hayes had chosen, was guiding 30 of Horizon's senior managers through a complex module on systemic bias. 6 months ago, Richard would have dismissed this as corporate fluff, a waste of billable hours. Today he listened with the intensity of a man whose life had depended on it, because it had. He heard his managers murmur as Dr. Sharma presented an anonymous case study. It detailed how a seemingly minor act of disrespect at a coffee shop could be rooted in generations of ingrained stereotypes. He saw the flicker of understanding and the flicker of resistance on the faces around him. He recognized the same arrogant dismissal he himself had once possessed. "The point isn't that you're all bad people, Doctor," Sharma explained, her voice patient but firm. "The point is that the system we exist in has created blind spots. Your job now is not to feel guilty, it's to learn to see." For Richard, It was like a new color had been introduced to his spectrum of vision. He now saw the microaggressions he'd been blind to his entire life, the way a male executive would interrupt a female colleague, the way security would watch a person of color linger in the first-class lounge. He saw the hundreds of potential Kyle Thompsons in his own organization's small-minded people just waiting for an opportunity to exert their petty power. The training wasn't a punishment anymore. It was essential maintenance on a machine he had almost flown into the ground. The true echo of that day at JFK, however, was not playing out in a training room. It was playing out in the toxic wilds of the internet. Kyle Thompson had not, as Richard had hoped, faded into obscurity. After months of silence, he had re-emerged, skillfully rebranded. He was no longer the disgraced gate agent. He was a free speech martyr, a victim of a powerful, vindictive billionaire and the woke mob. He had found a champion in Jed Hawk, the host of a wildly popular and controversial podcast, The Cauldron. So they fire you, they ruin your life, all because you made a little joke about a weird name. Hawk boomed into his microphone, his voice a performance of synthetic outrage. I was just trying to lighten the mood. You know it's a stressful job, Kyle said, his voice now practiced in the art of victimhood. This woman, this Seraphina Hayes, she didn't like it. So she snaps her fingers and a whole airline shuts down. Is that the world we want to live in, where the super-rich can destroy a regular guy's life over nothing? The narrative was powerful, dishonest, and spreading like wildfire. A Justice for Kyle crowdfunding campaign had raised over $100,000. He was making the rounds on right-wing media, a convenient symbol for their culture war. The effect on Horizon was poisonous. They were now being attacked from both sides. On one side, they were forever the airline that had harbored a racist. On the other, they were the cowardly corporation that had bowed to a woke agenda. The true tectonic shift, however, was happening behind the closed doors of their competitors. At the headquarters of Trans-Pacific Air CEO Catherine Vance stood before her board. A large screen behind her showed a single photo of Dr. Seraphina Hayes. For the last 6 months, Catherine began, her voice sharp, we have all privately enjoyed the spectacle of Horizon's public flogging. We have poached their premium customers and thanked our lucky stars it wasn't us. Today that changes. She clicked a remote. A slide appeared with 2 words, vendor vulnerability. Richard Sterling's mistake wasn't hiring a racist. She continued pacing before the long mahogany table. It was not knowing that the woman his racist employee decided to mock held the kill switch to his entire international operation. We have reviewed our own critical dependencies. Our logistics software comes from a firm in Tel Aviv. Our engine maintenance analytics are handled by a company in Germany. Our crew scheduling system is licensed from a startup in Silicon Valley. Do we know who the Seraphina Hayes is at each of those companies? Do we know what our contracts say about brand integrity? Have we wargamed our response if one of our baggage handlers in Manila has a bad day and insults the wrong person? The board members shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't. The Horizon incident created a new category of corporate risk, Catherine declared. I'm calling it dignity default risk. The risk that a failure of basic human decency can trigger a catastrophic contractual failure. We need armor. I want our legal team to review every critical vendor contract. I want our HR team to identify every single employee with a history of passenger complaints. I want our DEI training to be gutted and replaced with something that actually addresses risk, not just ticks a box. We are not doing this because it's the right thing to do, though it is. We are doing this because the cost of another Kyle Thompson is no longer a small lawsuit. It's extinction. This was Seraphina Hayes' true, lasting impact. She had weaponized decency. She had turned respect into a non-negotiable term of service. Back in Geneva, where she had since established a European headquarters for ALT, Seraphina was watching this all unfold. Marcus Thorne was in her office, a tablet in his hand, showing an article about Kyle's newfound fame. "The man has the resilience of a cockroach," Marcus said, disgusted. "He's monetizing his bigotry. Do you want Eleanor to draft a cease and desist? We could sue him for defamation." Seraphina stared out the window at the placid lake. Her first instinct, that cold, hard fury she'd felt at the gate, was to crush him, to unleash her legal team and bury him in litigation until his crowdfunding money was a distant memory. But she was playing a different game now. "No," she said softly. "Fighting him in the mud gives him legitimacy. It makes his narrative seem real. You don't argue with a fool, Marcus. You render his argument irrelevant." "And how do we do that?" "With this," she said, tapping her own tablet. She brought up the website for a newly launched entity, the Horizon Foundation for Dignified Travel. It's time for the foundation to release its first report. 2 weeks later, the report dropped. It was titled The Economics of Respect, a quantitative analysis of dignity, default risk in the global service sector. It was a dry, academic, 80-page document, but it landed in the business world with the force of a bomb. It was filled with charts, data models, and financial projections. It analyzed dozens of case studies, from viral videos of passenger removals to social media boycotts, and calculated the direct, quantifiable financial impact of discriminatory incidents. The Horizon ALT case was featured, but as a clinical anonymous example of maximum contractual enforcement. The report didn't talk about feelings. It talked about shareholder value. It didn't talk about morality. It talked about risk mitigation. It gave CEOs like Catherine Vance the perfect apolitical, data-driven ammunition to justify sweeping cultural changes. It was unassailable. It completely bypassed Kyle Thompson's culture war and went straight for the boardroom. It made respecting customers not a matter of wokeness, but a matter of fiduciary duty. The final echo of Kyle's laugh was not his whining on a podcast. It was the sound of his actions being turned into a line item on a corporate risk assessment matrix. Seraphina Hayes had not only won the battle, she had written the new rules of engagement for the entire war. She had built the armor that other companies were now desperately trying to wear, and in doing so ensured that while there would always be more Kyles in the world, they would find it increasingly and expensively difficult to find a place to work. So what's the real takeaway here? It's more than just a satisfying story of karma. It's a powerful lesson in the modern age. In a world this interconnected, the actions of one person enabled by a flawed system can have consequences that ripple out at the speed of light. Dr. Seraphina Hayes didn't just have money. She had structural power, and she used it to demand something more valuable than any flight ticket basic human respect. This story serves as a stark reminder to every corporation that your biggest liability might not be on a balance sheet, but in the casual cruelty you allow to fester in your culture. The person you underestimate today might just own the network your entire existence depends on tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of justice, karma, and the hidden power dynamics that shape our world.